four horsemen of the apocalypse have challenged the imagination of every generation since the end of the first century. Moving relentlessly across history, they wield great destructive power over humanity. But are these ominous riders relevant in the 21st century?
This is part 3 of a series of videos questioning the connection of the four horsemen to the current coronavirus outbreak, also known as COVID-19. There have been many discussions over the last month or so on YouTube and even on this channel about whether the four horsemen are upon us and that this coronavirus is an element of those four horsemen. Now, we're going to go through the horsemen and what each one represents, because I think there's some confusion. I've seen some comments on the previous videos where there was definitely some confusion and disagreement, which is fine. This is a book of Revelation written in apocalyptic language, so it requires some interpretation because the language is not straightforward. It's intended to be full of imagery. Some think that John wrote also this way, not only to try to describe the indescribable, but also to be able to have his letters and his book of Revelation be able to be distributed throughout the Roman Empire, or at least get it off the island of Patmos that he was exiled on, by writing about the Romans themselves without actually calling them out by name, by using the imagery. So there's a number of theories on that, but the point is it's called apocalyptic literature for that reason, that it's up to interpretation, and that presents challenges. So let's go through what the four horsemen represent. I personally believe if we're going to tie the coronavirus to any of the horsemen, it would be the fourth horseman. And I'll explain why when we get to that. So real quickly, just to talk about the first three, to explain who they are. We need to keep in mind that Jesus talked on the Olivet Discourse, as it's called, in Matthew 24. You also read it in Mark 13 and Luke 21. He talked about the end times. His disciples asked him, when they would be and what would be the sign of his second coming. So he talks about the events preceding those end times. And, a lot of these events could happen anytime from John's time until today and even beyond. These didn't all have to happen within a short period of time. They can be spread out. So given that, we have the first four seals that are opened by the Lamb, and of course that's Jesus. He opens these seals in heaven, and with each of the first four seals comes four horses with different horsemen on them. All right, so each is commanded to come forward from four beings. There are some sort of special angels called cherubim, the living creatures. You hear different terms from different translations. But, he says, "Now I watched," and this is in Revelation 6, 1-2. "Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, 'Come!' And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer." Revelation 6, 1-2. So horses in Scripture are typically associated with triumph and majesty, conquest, and so forth. That makes sense then that this first horse is white, which is what a conquering king would use to ride into a nation's city that he had just successfully defeated. Also, this white horse and white color to the image of Christ riding in his final triumph over evil at the end of Revelation shows that this is some sort of representation or imitation, and therefore if it's not truly Christ, then it's the Antichrist trying to represent Christ. So that's another good reason that would be white. And he wears a special crown that signifies his high status. The rider carries a bow, but there are no arrows mentioned, and some people think that that communicates that the rider is a warrior, that he will initially conquer not through force but actually through peace. So even though he's carrying this bow, since he's not actually shooting arrows, he's using peace as his way of conquering the earth, of lulling them into following him. So that's the first horse. It's the rider on that first horse is the Antichrist. War is unleashed upon the earth with the coming of the second horseman. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, 'Come,' and out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword." That's Revelation 6, 3-4. Now, could this be referring to Nero's slaughter of Christians at that time, or those slain under Domitian's persecutions? Could it be World War I or II, or anything even recent? All of those things are possible. So there's a good chance we've already had the first and second horses appear on the earth. Not for sure, but it's possible. We've had peace that we thought was real peace, and it wasn't. Even the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, eventually died off. That could have been what was alluded to in the first horse, or it could still be someone to come. And then, of course, we've had many wars and slaughters and so forth that could be associated with the second. Even the red horseman, that color, 2 Kings 3:22-23, points out red being the color of war and bloodshed. That's what it depicts. Jesus described this period of time in his Olivet Discourse. He says, quote, "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places." All right, so that's Matthew 24:6-7. Now we get to the third horseman. The third horseman represents horrible famines that will come upon the earth. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hands. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures, saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and wine." That's from Revelation 6:5-6. So a denarius was about a day's wage back in the first century, and a quart of wheat was about the portion of one person's meal. Barley was normally used to feed the animals, but sometimes it was also eaten by the poor. And oil and wine were typically used for cooking. They were also staples as part of the diet also. The scales carried by the black horse's rider represents a measuring system that will give a person barely enough to eat for a full day's labor. So this shows that food would be costing between 8, 10, 12 times the normal price in the first century. So clearly we're looking at famine conditions showcased by the third horseman of the apocalypse. Again, poverty and famine are the effects of war and bloodshed. And again, inflation looks like it's going to be really bad during this third horseman. Now, this brings us to the fourth horseman. And this is where many are wondering if what we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus is related to this fourth horseman. So let's read about him from Revelation 6:7-8. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. That's Revelation 6:7-8. Just a side note, the trumpets are going to destroy a third of the earth. We'll see that in chapter 8 of Revelation. And the bowls are just complete destruction. So you see this progression in worse and worse, higher in percentages of the earth being impacted by these events. This pale horse, the word pale that's used here, or ashen, in some translations in the Greek is chloros. You might recognize that from the word chlorophyll. And this yellowish green horse is the color of a corpse, or even a plant, that greenish color. So obviously death is the natural result of war and famine, and probably death from pestilence or plague, which often follows famine. And then we're told Hades is following the rider. In this case, Hades is a word that is representative of the grave. So basically, death is riding this horse, and then the grave follows shortly after for those that die. So that all makes sense. So again, a full 1/4 of the earth's population will perish from the four horsemen, which showcases why Jesus says in Matthew 24:21 that the time of tribulation will be something that the world has not seen up to that point. And what's worse, it is only the beginning of God's judgments that will come upon the earth. So I thought about this. If this is something that we've not seen, I could buy into this idea of the fourth horseman and the coronavirus. But it sure sounds like the 1918 Spanish flu and the Black Plagues and the many other horrendous pestilences that have occurred over the centuries seem to impact a lot more people, or at least a higher percentage of people back then than now. Again, if you're saying 25% of the population. Well, the population was less back then, so that was a pretty high percent of people that were affected by those plagues. I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly the coronavirus has the potential to do that. But so far, it seems to be mainly impacting, elderly people and people with pre-existing conditions. So we're not close to a number like 25% of the earth right now from the coronavirus. So in my opinion, I don't think at this point we can say that it is definitely tied to the fourth horseman or the pale horse with this virus we're experiencing. However, is it still part of the birth pains leading to Jesus' second coming? Well, sure. I mean, everything is leading up to that. We just had an earthquake today in Utah also. So we have earthquakes, we have pestilence, we have wars and rumors of wars that are always going on. So none of that has really stopped happening since the beginning and dawn of civilization. But they definitely get a lot worse. And like we talked about earlier, the trumpets are going to destroy a third of the earth and the bowls are complete destruction. So there's a sense that it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's when we know we're getting closer and closer and closer. So those are my thoughts. I'd be curious what your thoughts are on this, and if you believe the coronavirus could get to the point that we could see it tied in to the fourth horseman, the pale horse. Let me know your thoughts, leave your comments below, and thanks for watching this video.